The Clock, a story by Ciro Discepolo. Hello, Brogy. It's me. The security guards are at the entrance. There's a package for you. You need to come down and get it because there are only a few of us and there's a lot of work to do. But I don't. The other man had hung up. Giovanni Brogy also put down the receiver and was immediately bombarded with questions. He knew he could move during his shift for urgent needs, with the supervisor's prior permission. The security guard had told him to go down and get the package, but although he had no particular authority, he had told him to come down, and he was unable to assess the consequence of disobedience. Who could have sent him that package? And what could it contain? He certainly hadn't made any mail-order purchases, or asked or solicited anything from anyone. He thought, there must have been a mistake. There were other Brogy in the company, and perhaps they had misread the name. He continued to concoct explanations that would convince him of his innocence regarding the package, and that would reassure him at least that by acting prudently he would have no need to fear unpleasant consequences. Finally, he decided to ask the supervisor directly, acting wisely, and not before making sure no one was watching him perform the operation. He wisely pushed his chair back and walked toward the supervisor's table at the other end of the large room from the 12th table in the 5th row. They were all arranged in parallel rows, one behind the other, so that each employee could, if he wanted, touch the four surrounding them in the directions of the cardinal points. They could all have seemed like a single large cross, if it weren't for the noise of the calculating machines blasting out endless series of numbers non-stop. It all gave the impression of vast refectories and enormous classrooms, with the teacher far away, ever present. Instead, it was a huge transformer, a huge paper transformer where invoices, statements, balance sheets, endless credit notes, and strings of figures were transformed into just as many invoices, statements, balance sheets, and credit notes. Only the order of composition of these numbers written on paper and weighing hundreds of quintals a year changed. Giovanni Brogy, who, with these men, over 15 years had learned to form countless number combinations, had also learned to multiply, divide, add, and subtract them 8 hours a day and 5 days a week, lived in resonance with the calculator, and at times even seemed to anticipate the keystrokes the man was about to press. That was Giovanni Brogy's world in the mid-1960s. Of course, there was also the other one at home, with his aging mother and Sundays spent fishing by the river. Some evenings, returning home after a full day's work at the Persichetti Company, it didn't matter much if he'd discovered a 1.2 million lire shortfall with the company, even though that was the world where he felt useful, where he could be at peace with his conscience. Indeed, that's simply how things worked, and he diligently did his job, and in exchange he was paid a salary that allowed him to live with his mother, and no one had anything to reproach him for. So he headed down the narrow corridor toward the only desk at the other end of the large room, facing the others. Some colleagues raised their heads to look at him, while their hands continued to frantically fidget over the keys of their machines. But seeing nothing of interest, they once again fell into line with the others, who hadn't been distracted in the slightest. Brogy approached the desk where the supervisor had been watching him for a while. "Excuse me, Mr. Nasty. There was a call from the entrance, and they want me to come down and pick up a package addressed to me." "Office stuff? I couldn't even imagine who could have sent it to me." "Okay, go ahead, but hurry up." Thank you, Mr. Nasty. I'll be right there. By the way, I wanted to tell you something about this morning's statement about the Cominelli Company. There's a mistake. A mistake? How is that possible, I assure you? Look, the total written is 18,724,000, while it actually says 18,742,000. It's anagrammed. Luckily, I noticed the mistake. The figure was significantly different, and what would have happened if he'd anagrammed the first numbers? The error would probably have reached the data processing system, and once discovered, it would have taken hours of work to fix everything. So try to stay awake. We know you're not a genius, but for this job you only need to know basic arithmetic and be careful. Don't worry, Mr. Nasty, don't worry. I assure you it won't happen again. I don't understand how such a distraction could have happened. From now on, I'll be very careful, I assure you. Good, good. Now go, hurry up. After a few minutes, he reappeared in the large room, clutching, almost hiding, a package under his arm. So, Brogy, anything interesting? Work? The supervisor asked. Mr. Nasty, I think there's not even a return address. May I open it later, so as not to disturb you? Do as you wish. Now go back to work and try to give me the statement this evening. He sat back down and felt relieved to have avoided any more embarrassing questions. He also wondered where to open the package addressed to him. There was no return address, nor were there any other signs that might suggest what it contained or who had sent it. He decided not to think about it until he was alone. He got back to work, careful to avoid making any more mistakes. When he left the office, he avoided his colleagues and hurried to the bus stop without seeing anyone. When he got home, he kissed his mother like every evening and told her he wanted to rest before dinner. Once inside the room, he quickly opened the package, feeling a growing curiosity mingled with some unidentified fear. He removed the outer cardboard, removed some straw from under more straw, and took out a black leather case the size of a cigarette pack. He put his nose close to it and could smell only the leather, which was quite heavy given its decidedly small size. He opened it. There was a metal wristwatch with a black leather strap. It was flat, heavy, with no markings, no numbers, no second hands. Visibly, none of the little wheels used to wind and position the hour and minute hands were moving. The watch, however, kept the correct time, and the movement was like one of those old chronometers that were set in the morning by radio signals. He held the watch to his ear and heard no sound. He held it to the other ear and heard no sound either. He looked again carefully and noticed that no writing or abbreviation indicated the brand or country of manufacture. Truly a strange watch in its weight, shine, metal, workmanship, lack of mechanisms or adjustments, and lack of ticking. It was unlike any other he had seen before. It seemed to be the product of advanced technology, even more advanced than American or Japanese. Brogy wondered once again, who could have sent him that package without even a note? Nothing. He thought of 100 different possibilities, almost all of them rich in espionage and or persecution elements. He discarded all but the one that seemed the most plausible. It must have been a prank played by his office colleagues, like that time when they sent him letters from supposed admirers and pushed him to go on a date where he found a fat woman they had captured on Lonely Hearts waiting for him. It had to be a prank now, too, because where could they have gotten the watch? A watch like this? And what was this prank aimed at? He couldn't come up with any logically satisfying answers and decided to wear the watch on his wrist. trying to detect any suspicious reactions among his colleagues at the office. He would tell his mother that the watch was a gift from the company for his 15 years of service. And so he did. Later, he had dinner, watched some television, and then went to bed without any premonition that the following day would be the most important day of his life. The next morning in the office, he experienced the first disconcerting episode of the day. Giovanni Broghi, always punctual, had set to work, showing off his beautiful new watch and looking around with a mischievous expression. He had begun adding long series of numbers and digits, pressed the total button, and just before the calculator printed the result, he anticipated 59,728,000 in his mind. Suddenly he went pale and felt his whole body tremble. Could he have known the result before reading it on the machine? But was it true, or had he been imagining the temporal sequence of events in his imagination? Yet he was certain he couldn't have been wrong, and had thought of the number before it appeared on the paper. He decided to try again. He typed 5,699 times 317, and immediately thought of 1,806,583, just before the machine confirmed it. Then a great emotion gripped him, and he began to sweat coldly. He understood that something big was happening, even though he wasn't yet clear on what it was. He couldn't even rejoice, and he was still terribly afraid. He tried again and again, changing numbers and operations, using decimals, increasing the digits, and he predicted the results every time. "I've become a machine," he screamed in his mind, increasingly out of control. He knew of humans who, living in constant close contact with animals, had inherited particular behaviors, but he had never heard anything like this referred to machines. He told himself, "I can't have become a calculator. I'm made of flesh, bone, blood, and muscle." Calculators, on the other hand, are made of transistors, DIP16 integrated circuits, LSI devices, frequency decoding, outputs to liquid crystal displays, and so many other things like that. But wait, how can I know these technical details if I've never been able to tell a blender from a radio? His emotions were rising exponentially. He could almost not control himself. He looked around in terror that others might discover his secret and punish him. He kept wondering how it could have happened. All his thoughts raced uncontrollably and turbulently through his mind. Now even the calculator's circuit diagram appeared to him, and he understood it. Yet he felt pain as he pinched himself, and everything around him seemed normal and familiar. The supervisor, his colleagues, the machine, tireless, all as always, and he had been living an exceptional experience ever since yesterday, since that mysterious package, the clock. Today he discovered he was as fast and accurate as the electronic calculator. He was aware of his perfect knowledge of electronics, chemistry, mechanics, and any other subject he could think of. Today, in just a few minutes, he had learned everything and more than in his previous life. As if someone capable of doing so had suddenly freed him from ignorance and replaced his microbrain with the essence of 1,000 computers programmed on all of human science. If this someone existed, it had to be the same one who had sent him the watch. This was almost certain because he mentally performed a rapid calculation of probabilities, and decreed with absolute precision that such exceptional events occurring so quickly from one another could only be connected and produced by the same matrix. He looked around again, and for the first time was not afraid to meet the gaze of others, whom he felt he could challenge. He thought of all the humiliations he had received from those men, who now appeared to him for what they were, insignificant and terribly ignorant beings. He thought of taking revenge, of exploiting the magic moment. He decided to teach Fassi a lesson, always full of arrogance, about being unbeatable at chess. He had played with him a few times and had made a poor showing, mocked by those present who encouraged the other to make fun of him. He decided he would teach him a lesson. He waited until lunchtime, and upon returning from the cafeteria, he approached while his colleague was preparing the chessboard for the daily exhibitionist exercise. "Shall we play a game?" he asked. "Sure." "Sit down," the other said with a sadistic smile and a wink at those present, whose numbers quickly swelled. A wave of cheer swept through the group that had formed circles around the two. The newcomers climbed on the other's shoulders so as not to miss the spectacle. Squeals of joy could be heard, mixed with general excitement. "What's happening?" the newcomers asked. "Brogy is making another blunder at chess with Fassi," the others replied, anticipating the pleasure of seeing him crushed by the champion, perhaps accompanied by some hilarious situation that might arise in that circumstance. Fassi was dealt the white pieces and made the first move. Pawn in. The classic opening moves followed. On the third move, the champion moved his bishop, choosing the attack of the Spanish game. During the moves that followed, Renzo Fassi and everyone present understood that something big was happening. Brogy was responding to White's moves with immediate moves without thinking, and his choices were excellent, so much so that the fearful Brogy had switched from defense to attack, forcing his opponent to abandon his ostentatious confidence and think carefully before any further moves. His Majesty, evidently extremely nervous, frequently cast incredulous glances at the other player. The others around him had grown serious, and a deep silence had fallen over the scene. Fassi pondered the next move for 10 minutes and then, with a gesture of anger and fear, moved his queen forward. At this point, Giovanni Brogy looked at everyone present, looked at the other, and said, "Now it will be made in 9 moves." And he, in turn, moved the queen. With a general gasp, Renzo Fassi clung to his chair. Then, after a moment of bewilderment, he continued and said, "Show me, you clown." Not even Bobby Fischer could predict a mate with a combination of 9 pairs of moves. "Well, we'll see. It's your turn to move," Brogy replied. "Hold on," said one of those present. "The lunch break ends in 10 minutes, and if you continue at this pace, you can finish the match next Friday." "I propose a move every 30 seconds, okay?" Brogy asked. The other wanted to refuse, seeing how things were going, but everyone was staring at him, and he didn't feel like a coward. "Okay, I accept," he replied. At that point, everyone's attention became intense, and in the next few minutes, those present witnessed the collapse of the Fassi legend. The Category B employee, Giovanni Brogy, with only one precedent in the history of chess, Anderson's Immortal, had won by predicting and constructing a long series of moves, 9 to be precise, as he had announced it. After that, he stood up as he had seen Perry Mason do so many times, following the speech that left the prosecutor with a dog's face. He was beaten, and everyone was speechless, and then sat down at his desk. The beeps vibrated, and everyone returned to work. Brogy, sitting at his desk, savored the pleasure of triumph, and his colleagues couldn't help but express everything they were feeling. He thought about the aftermath, not as he had done a few hours earlier, about returning home, about slippers, about the potato stew, about the television. He thought about the future, about that new situation that was just dawning, but decided to postpone any plans until later, outside the office in a more collected state. He then applied himself, working and immediately starting to add long rows of numbers, simply reading the columns and marking the totals he'd calculated mentally. He continued until the phone rang and he heard the supervisor telling him to come over. He approached his boss, who said, "So, Brogy, do you want to get to work? I've been watching her for half an hour, and I haven't seen her press a single key." The phone rang, and the man paused to answer. "How's that possible? Has the technician been called? Damn! How can you entrust the salaries of 2,000 people to the circuits of a machine? All right, I'll notify the staff right away. Goodbye." Then, turning to Brogy, he said, "You go ahead. We have much bigger problems to solve. They just told me the big brain has crashed, and no one will be paid tomorrow. The house technician was called, but it seems like he can't figure it out either. If they let me try, I think I can do something. I've seen the terminal up close, and I'm almost certain I can fix it. Can I go away for half an hour?" "Of course I'll take you, so if I have time I'll also take you to repair the nuclear power plant in the area, which had been shut down since yesterday." And he finished the sentence with a nervous laugh. When they reached the big brain, they saw a group of people surrounding the technician, who was now on the verge of hysterical tears. All the panels had been removed, and they could glimpse several thousand colored wires snaking everywhere, along with hundreds of little black things that looked like transistors or something similar, making the landscape depressing. The technician, bent over and holding a strange device in his hands, seemed to be poking around, looking dejected, while others, especially the general manager, urged them to move further to the right or left, as if the fault could be found by sniffing the circuitry. "Accountant Brogy says he can repair the calculator," Nasty told those present. "And what are we waiting for to let him try it?" the big boss shouted. "Step aside!" Giovanni Brogy took a step forward, the others watching him with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. "Show me the circuit diagram of this computer," he said. "Quick, the diagram!" the big boss thundered again. Immediately, a large sheet of paper, at least a meter on a side, was spread out before them, a sea of lines, dots, and incomprehensible symbols. Brogy studied carefully for 5 minutes and asked, "Give me an oscilloscope." The technicians handed him a national dual-trace oscilloscope they had just worn out in vain attempts to find the fault. Brogy studied it for a moment to assess the location of the adjustment knobs, moved some of the probes to 4 different points on the circuit, turning to look at the green traces on the cathode ray gun. Then he looked up and said, "Very simple. There's a short circuit between the collector and the base of the emitter follower B121 on board T14A3. Everyone stared with bulging eyes and no one moved. The technician, urged by the supervisor, pulled the T14A3 board from the back panel of the computer and just glanced at it and shouted, "Oh my God, it's true! There's a drop of oxide between the terminals of that transistor." The other's eyes lit up, and there were handshakes and applause. Squeals of joy mingled with phrases like, "I told you we should have looked behind," or "I too had thought it must be a short circuit. From experience, it's always a short circuit when a machine breaks down." Meanwhile, the technician had removed the oxide drop and reinserted the card. At that moment, the silicon giant came back to life, flashing all its colored lights with joy, thus increasing the enthusiasm of those present. At this point, the big boss took Brogy by the arm and led him into his office, where he sat him down in an armchair, offering him a cigarette, which he politely declined. "So, our Brogy," he said, accompanying his sentence with a pat on the other's shoulder, "the company needs people with few words. Actions count. How could that clumsy nasty not notice you? Let's forget it. We'll think about it later. Do you really intend to continue wasting away in accounting? I have big plans for you, naturally accompanied by big salaries. So what do you think? Say something. Don't just stare at me like that." Brogy, having acquired in the last few minutes an incredible confidence and a steely temperament, was nevertheless thrilled to be in the presence of the big boss, the man he feared most after the doorman. "I'd like to think about it. I don't want to make hasty decisions. I'd like to discuss it with my family, too." "How do you repair calculators worth 300 million lyre in 10 minutes and want to consider accepting promotions? Well, do as you please. In any case, come back soon and tell me what you've decided, and remember that the company needs and expects you. Don't hesitate, Mr. Director. I'll be back soon. Goodbye, and many, many more compliments. By the way, you'll have to explain how you managed to find the fault in such a short time. Go ahead now. Take care, dear." Giovanni Brogy left the office alone because the others had preceded him a few minutes earlier, immediately after the buzzer that informed 2,000 employees that the workday was over. He set off down the street along the sidewalk, determined to take a walk before returning home, still reeling from the multitude of exceptional events that had befallen him in the last 24 hours, and that had drastically changed the course of his life. The deafening noise of traffic stopped at intervals for the briefest of moments, allowing him to hear, almost miraculously, the chirping of the first swallows circling in that cloudy early spring sky. Every now and then, a pristine breeze would come from who knows where and replace the foul-smelling smell of the exhaust fumes from the vehicles that crowded that rush hour on the outskirts of the Lombardy capital. In front of him, hundreds of his fellow men were hurrying back to their homes, and it seemed they were rushing towards something. A few feet away, 10 and 12-year-old boys waited for the bus, chatting, using the formal sir form. Some, sitting on the ground, flailed their arms and twisted their faces as if having an epileptic fit. People walked past side by side and continued on without stopping. Giovanni Brogy felt all this for the first time, as if he was seeing the world around him. People, objects, and situations surrounded him, seemingly taking on a distinctive character that allowed him alone to see how that uniform whole had been extrapolated. He felt as if he were high up, orbiting the earth, and seeing many little ants scurrying back and forth, seemingly determined not to bump into one another. Then he realized he was philosophizing. He knew only the philosophy of living peacefully. He thought again of the watch, and told himself that whoever had sent him the watch had also given him the gift of human knowledge. They must have also made him sensitive to the problems of existence. Could it be a coincidence that he was thinking about the foolish behavior of those men who had allowed themselves to be convinced of the usefulness of infernal machines and electrical gadgets? They wanted at all costs to replace the small daily annoyances like brushing their teeth or shaving. They had forgotten the 1,000 joys they once felt when they smelled the fresh scent of flowers in the morning and could gaze around, focusing almost endlessly, without any concrete walls in front of them, until they saw the sun set. But who were these people, and why had they opened their eyes? What did they want from him, and why from him? The euphoric feeling of power that had gripped him moments earlier when he had noticed his transformation was now replaced by a wise meditation on the abysmal limits of the mysteries of the universe, of humanity, of life, complicated by genetic codes that allowed them to trace humanity back to the origin of ribonucleic acid, bringing them directly face to face with the sources of life that allowed them to cross the boundaries of the unknowable. Not even physics, chemistry, and all the human sciences could free him from the impossibility of looking at humanity and the universe from the outside. Now he felt like a toy that had been wound up and started spinning, but was now coming to a halt. All that knowledge had brought him to the threshold of a greater knowledge, to the edge of great truths, a distant and mysterious truth, and he felt he could cross that threshold, but something was still missing. "Watch where you put your feet," shouted the driver who had almost hit him. Removing himself thoughtfully from his fantasies, Broggie realized he had reached his own house. He climbed the stairs and opened the door. "Giovanni," his mother asked, "they brought a package for you. I put it on the table in your room." Giovanni Broggie ran to get it, his heart pounding. He tore open the wrapping. The outside was identical to the one from the day before, only larger. The return address was still missing. He pushed aside the straw, looked inside, and saw an alarm clock.